You are listening to episode number 81 of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. I have an awesome show for y'all today. We are talking with Brian Lloyd. He is the pilot that flew around the world commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Amelia Earhart flight around the world, so stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis, my call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike, and I am your host for this podcast. This podcast is released every Thursday morning. You can find the show notes for today's episode with all the extra information and the links that we talk about in the episode. You can find that at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/81. That's number 81. Guys, gals, today I have an awesome interview with Brian Lloyd, and his call sign is Whiskey Bravo 6 Romeo Quebec November. And he is the pilot that flew around the world, basically following the path that Amelia Earhart took 80 years ago. But before we get to him, I have another small interview that I want to share with y'all. And that is with a gentleman by the name of Bob Hankins. Now, Bob is a member of the American Legion Amateur Radio Club, and he's going to come on real fast, real short, like 5 minutes or so, and he's going to talk about a special event that's coming up this weekend, and that I wanted to make sure and help spread the word. Anybody can get onto it, and I'm going to let him tell y'all a little bit about it. So we're going to talk with him a little bit, and I'll be right back, and then we'll talk with Brian. One more quick thing before we go to that interview. I want to apologize for the audio quality. I actually did this interview on a phone, so the audio is not great, and I apologize for that. So please bear with me for the first five minutes or so that this interview is going to take, and then we'll get back to... I'll be back, and then we'll talk with Brian.
Hey everybody, we are here with Bob Hankins. Bob, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, because I don't have my notes here in front of me.
Hey, no problem. It's Bob Hankins, Hawkins. That's Kilowatt Delta 5 Alpha Tango, or I like to say Kilowatt Delta 5 Army Tanker.
So we have a special event coming up here pretty soon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on this weekend?
Absolutely. I'm part of the American Legion Amateur Radio Club, which is also known as K9TAL, out of headquarters out in Indianapolis, and we're trying to conduct special events that bring attention to those who either serve our military vets, or they actually operate to preserve the memory of the sacrifice our military vets made. And such an organization is the USS Slater Museum organization up in Albany, New York. They have done a very nice job of preserving the Slater for generations to come to see the sacrifice that the sailors and warriors on the Slater made during wartime. So we'll conduct a special event from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the afternoon on both D-Star Reflector 001 Charlie and Echo Link on the Crossroads Conference.
Okay. And all you're doing is D-Star and Echo Link, correct? No HF?
No HF for this event. One of the things that this will enable us to do is get a much farther reach out to the entire country, even overseas. We won't be subject to the solar cycle fluctuations that we're having this particular down cycle. So
right.
We're trying to maximize the number of contacts. We're particularly on Echolink, we're going to conduct this a little bit differently. If you'll go to Echolink Crossroads Conference, you go to the chat window to check in, and just, for example, you go to the chat window, you put your call sign and then say checking in. So I put KD5AT checking in, and then we'll take those check-ins in order, and we'll make in an audio contact with that person. You'll have a chance to get on the air, but this way, it'll avoid pileups. Pileups can really, serve to cause a dysfunction in Echolink, and this will prevent, pileups. But if you're on an Echolink repeater, and you can't access it, we'll pause every few minutes to take mobile check-ins as well. So this will, prevent pileups.
Awesome. So, I mean, this is actually going to make it a whole lot easier for anybody, I mean, technicians or any class to get in on this special event. So it's really awesome that y'all are doing that, especially on D-Star and on Echolink. Wow, that's awesome.
But we want to bring some new light to the way we do special events. It's not just have a special event and try to contact a few people. We really want to get the social media engagement for our special event too. So we would appreciate if those who have access to Facebook, in addition to checking in on Echolink, if they have access to Facebook, to go look up the USS Slater and check in on their Facebook page and say something about the special event as well. And that way we can really show. We want to think, how do we show the museumship group that we are active as hams? Well, they need to see what we're doing, and if we go do it on their Facebook page, it just helps show the activity that we're creating.
Right, absolutely. So definitely all y'all share. I will have a post up on Facebook as well as Twitter. So if you see those, please share it. Let's get the word out and have a awesome special event this weekend. What other special events do y'all have coming up?
We're looking into doing several special events. Many of them around obviously the Memorial Days, the Veterans Days, and things like that. But also we're looking at other days that might be relevant to the subject of our affection. Like how about a special event the day the ship was built, to honor the memory of those who served on that special day, the day it was christened, the day it was launched, or activities like that. But we're also looking at other, not just ships, but also other groups that we could recall the memory of, like naval air stations or Army posts or groups like that. But there's also the active groups that are serving veterans like now, like one I'm thinking of is the PTSD Foundation of America. They have a place in Houston called Camp Hope. And we have done 2 special events there at their annual barbecues. So we're looking at all these kinds of things. Now, I heard some people say they're really not into special events. I would say, why not? Because a special event is just a preparation for a deployment with an Ares type group for emergency operations. You do a special event, it's very, very similar. You got to set up a location. You've got to reach out to as many people as possible. You got to handle as much traffic as possible. Very similar activities. And so those who would poo-poo special events, I would say, rethink that a little. And besides that, they're fun.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Bob, is there a website that y'all have that has a list of all your special events that are coming up, or maybe to your club there?
There is not at this time, but my home club is Brazos Valley Amateur Radio Club. But I'm also take a look at the American Legion Amateur Radio Club. We call TALARC. And by the way, this is a good time for me to mention if there's an American Legion member out there who's a ham, why don't you join our effort if you're not part of it already? But if you're a ham who's a vet and you're not part of the Legion Amateur Radio Club, we'd love to add you to our ranks. Nationally, we've got about 3,000 members.
Wow.
And we're really trying to wake this up. I have just started recently the first TALARC post in Texas, and I think we're the 19th in the country. We're the first in Texas, and we're going to be trying to organize all the hams around the Houston region to assist us in reaching out to the needs of our veterans community.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Bob, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about this special event that's coming on. We hope to have a great special event station. Hopefully there will be a lot of the listeners that are listening tonight that will be able to check in on your special event. And hopefully you'll have a great turnout and many more special events to come.
Hey, God bless America.
All right, Bub. Have a great one.
73.
73.
All right, y'all. So there was the interview with Bob. And, you know, as I was listening to this, I realized that not once did we say when it was. So it is on August the 12th, which is this Saturday. And it's from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Time, I guess. Maybe. I'm not sure. But I believe it is. You can go to the Brazos Valley Amateur Radio Club. And there is a link on there, and I will share it in the group as well, the post that I saw it on. And again, it will be on the Echolink Crossroad Conference and on D-Star Reflector 001 Charlie. So, Bob, thanks for coming on, and hopefully y'all have an awesome special event station for this weekend. Okay, so on to the topic of today. Like I said, we are talking with Brian Lloyd, and he is the pilot that did the 80th commemorative flight around the world. We had an awesome conversation today. I'm actually recording this yesterday as y'all are listening on Wednesday. I recorded this. It is currently 11 o'clock at night, so I'm hoping to get this done relatively fast. But this interview was awesome, and I thank Brian for coming on, and I hope y'all enjoy it as much as I did. So I guess without anything further, let's go ahead and talk with Brian. Hey everybody, we are here with Brian Lloyd. His call sign is Whiskey Bravo 6 Romeo Quebec November. I think I actually
Or, Curtis,
yeah,
Whiskey before 6 is really quite nice.
Hey, I like that. I was going to say, I think I actually got the International Phonetic Alphabet right.
You did?
Yeah, well, the reason I say that is because I work in law enforcement. And we don't use the International Phonetic Alphabet, so I'm always getting, when I'm doing a podcast, I'm always saying the law enforcement phonetic alphabet, and when I'm giving back license plate returns, I always use the International Phonetic Alphabet. So I always get it backwards. So I think I actually got it right, but I like your phonetics better.
I can't tell you how long it took me to come up with those. Let me tell you.
I'm actually going to have to add that because I actually have a question on my Facebook group of interesting phonetics for your call sign. I'm actually going to have to put that on there because that was really good.
Do you know how hard it is to come up with phonetics for Quebec? It's really hard. There are so few words that start with Q. So I feel lucky that I managed to come up with that. But I think it took me a couple of years.
Hey, you did a really quite nice job.
Well, thank you.
So, Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And it goes dead.
No, I mean, it's just like you said, I'm going to ask you questions. Tell me about yourself. That is so open-ended. Curtis, that is just completely open-ended.
Okay, well, let me be a little bit more broad here.
No, actually, I'm going to jump in, and
okay.
I'm going to say there are a couple of threads that run through my life that have been there since I was really, really, really small. And they are aviation and radio. I cannot tell you when I was like 2-3 years old. Let me put it this way. Most kids take a teddy bear to bed. My parents were deathly afraid of the fact that the thing I wanted to take to bed was my father's electric drill because it would plug in. And so the lifelong love of radio and electricity and electronics goes way, way back. Likewise, aviation. I cannot imagine or remember a time in my life when there were not airplanes around due to the fact that my father was an aviator in the Navy. So early on, there were airplanes. And when he retired from the Navy, he got involved in general aviation and was involved in a startup airline. And so, never at any time during my life was I away from either radios or aviation. I do vaguely remember going to Stanford University with my father. My father graduated from Stanford University back in 1958. And we went to the Stanford University bookstore. This was 1962. And as we were wandering about in the Stanford bookstore, I spied the 1962 edition of the Radio Amateur's Handbook. And I pestered my father to buy that for me. And I taught myself electronics as a kid from the Radio Amateur's Handbook, 1962 edition. In fact, I still have that here somewhere. I also have the 1961, which was given to me by my Elmer, John Bassich, WB6RQN. So the whole radio thread, aviation thread, it runs through my entire life. Let me put it this way. There are two things. Think about magic.
I like magic.
What are two of the things that are sort of a constant thread in magic? One is flying. You know, people can magically fly from one place to another. The other is people can magically communicate over great distances. Telepathy or clairvoyance or whatever. Guess what? We have those two things. We have used engineering to create magic. Radios are magic. Airplanes are magic, except that we understand how they actually work, and therefore they're technically not magic. But still, think about it. We can fly through the air and go any place we want. Now we can fly through space. We can project our images, our information, our voices anywhere in the world nearly instantaneously, just like the magicians were supposed to have been able to do, many, many years ago. So there's that thread for me. I still think that radio and airplanes are magic. They're wonderful things. They let me do things that no one else can do or very few other people can do. So there you go. There's kind of Brian in a nutshell thing, and that ties the whole aviation and amateur radio piece in there pretty quickly.
There you go. So I'm assuming that you probably got your license somewhere around 1962?
No, I did not. It took me a long time before I finally actually got my license. I did not get my license until 1976. I did it back in the time before the no code. So I actually did the 5-word per minute code and the general class written. I did that back in 1976, and I've been licensed with the same call sign, WB6RQN, ever since then. When they changed the rules to change the code speed to 5 words per minute for general, I just went straight out and did the extra class. I've always really liked amateur radio from the point of view of the technical challenges that it presents. I've never been much of I'm not big on making QSOs. I'm definitely not a contester. My idea of a contest is to have all the fun of putting up a solar powered station on field day with a whole bunch of kids and making 100 contacts. So, that's my idea of a good time. But the technology of radio is something that has always really appealed to me. And early on, as a kid, I could have explained to you, both the phasing method and filter method for generating a single sideband signal. I could have told you the difference between, Class A, B1, Class A, B2, Class B, and Class C operating points for vacuum tubes. That part of it was the thing that really did it for me. And I went on, I went on, and my life was driven by being an electrical engineer and by technology. So amateur radio really kind of fed into that as well.
So it just kind of gave you a boost of what you did in life, basically, you could say.
Oh, absolutely. It was kind of a foregone conclusion. I know when I first went to college, I I couldn't really decide what I was going to do, but I finally decided I was going to be an aeronautical engineer. Then the engineering department at San Diego State required me to take a programming course in Fortran, and that ruined me for life. And that sent me off in the direction of data communications, which, of course, had this whole radio thread in it, which is, okay, we're going to do communications, we're going to do data, and we're going to do it over the radio. So digital modes, I go kind of pretty far back on digital modes. So yeah, that's another piece of it. And of course, there's the aviation thread again, engineering, aeronautical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, all of that kind of just tied together.
So do you? I realize your call sign is a California number, but you live here in Texas, right?
I do. I live in Texas now. I moved 4 years ago. I was born and raised in Southern California. Spent a whole bunch of my life in Silicon Valley and commuting to Silicon Valley in an airplane, as a matter of fact.
Really?
I used to commute every day. Yes, I used to commute every day from the Sierra Nevada foothills by Sacramento to Silicon Valley to work. So, yes, I was in my airplane twice a day, 7 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night, going to and from Silicon Valley. It sure beat driving, let me tell you.
Yeah, I imagine. Driving in the LA traffic, just not. I don't see how people do it.
Well, I mean, the Bay Area traffic, LA traffic, Bay Area traffic, both are pretty bad. But I must admit, flying in the morning, 7:30, beautiful day, sun's come up, and I'm flying over the Central Valley and over into the Livermore Valley and up over the mountains into the Bay Area, and looking at all of those cars with their red lights on, and I'm sailing overhead at 150 or 160 miles per hour. It didn't suck.
And just laughing at pointing.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm sorry I did that.
So did you work at a place near the airport or in the airport? Or?
Well, first off, you have to understand that in the United States, almost every place is near an airport. Not necessarily near a big airport that people think of as the airport, but there are lots and lots of airports all over the United States, usually an airport within 5 to 10 miles of wherever you want to go in the U.S. So being able to fly a general aviation airplane, such as I do, really opens up a lot of things. I was very much involved in the creation and early rollout of the Internet, and one of my pet projects was helping to connect the schools of California to the Internet in the early days, back in the early 90s. And so there wasn't enough business in any one place to justify business. But if I was able to serve the entire state, then there was enough business to build a nice little business. And my airplane let me do that, because literally my airplane would put me anywhere in the state of California in 2.5 hours from the Sacramento area. So I ended up with quite a few very interesting customers. My customer list read like a who's who of education and business in California. My customers were Sun Microsystems, Cisco, Genentech, InfoWorld Magazine, and I set up their earliest internet connections and servers and services, email, web servers, that kind of thing. And if they had a problem, they could call me at 2 o'clock in the morning, and literally I'd throw spare equipment in the airplane and fly there and fix it and have them back up again by 5 or 6 in the morning. So, and I did that on occasion. So, and I worked with the California Department of Education and co-wrote the K-12 Network Technology Planning Guide for school districts and schools on how to actually connect to this new internet thing. So, and the aviation tied into that. And, of course, all my work, actually, interestingly enough, my activity working on the internet began with packet radio and amateur radio. I was actively working with Phil Karn, KA9Q. You've probably heard he developed the KA9Q internet package for packet radio. And I actually took that with his blessing and turned it into the first dial-up commercial access box for the internet, and was very active in making it possible for people to connect to the internet using a modem. And that kind of seems to have spawned, who would have known that the internet was going to be for cat videos? I mean, really.
So we could really kind of say that we need to thank you for the internet that we have now. You're kind of like the godfather of the internet.
Well, no, don't do that. I'm not saying that. It's kind of like my airplane flying around the world, and it's now covered in signatures, because everywhere I went, I asked people to sign my airplane. And I pointed out that even though this was ostensibly a solo flight around the world, I could not have done it without the assistance of literally hundreds of people around the world and infrastructure around the world, airports, fuel delivery, people who put fuel in the airplane, handling agents, air traffic controllers, etc. There's an awful lot of aviation infrastructure out there that exists, and without it, I couldn't have done this trip. So same thing with the internet. I worked with literally hundreds of really, 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 really smart people. Surprisingly, a lot of them with ham radio licenses, who made the internet possible for everybody. So and I can't tell you how many people had HTs on their belts at the Internet Engineering Task Force meetings, where we would go and discuss the protocols and work out how the internet was going to operate.
Wow, that is definitely something that I was not expecting during this interview.
Well, yeah, it's I've had kind of a varied life. I tell people, here I am, 63, and I'm still wondering what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Well, that is just, it's great to have a life that you can look back on and say, I did this, I helped with this. And a lot of it stemmed from that little piece of paper that typically people have in their wallets or on their walls that says you're an amateur radio operator. And I've talked to so many people that have basically started their careers from that little piece of paper. And
Absolutely. I'm no exception. I got my license much later, but my first station was a Hammerland HQ 129X receiver, which is late 40s vintage. And my first transmitter was a Central Electronics Model 10A exciter with an Arc 5 transmitter as a VFO, because it was all I could afford as a kid. And I was working towards getting my ticket, and of course I had to build the station first, and it was all part of learning about electronics and learning about radio. So,
well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our talk with Brian. We're going to get into the topic of this podcast, and that is his recreating the flight around the world. So we'll be right back and come back, and we will talk about that. So stay tuned, y'all. Do you have an old-fashioned voltage or amp meter hooked to your station? Are you looking to find something that has more bells and whistles? Check out the West Mountain Radio Power Check. The Power Check has 8 display modes, including voltage, current flow in either direction, wattage, and amp hours, and will measure from 0 to 60 volts with 40 amps continuous load. It is accurate to within 10 millivolts and 10 milliamps. It has a backlit graphics LCD that will display data in digital, analog, and bar graph formats. You can even monitor your battery backup with a programmable gas gauge. The non-volatile memory stores more than 100,000 data points without power. That's nearly 2.5 months worth of data at 1 point per minute. It has a USB computer interface for configuration and data download, and you can program it to sound an alarm for overcurrent, over and under voltage, and amp hours. The software that comes with it allows you to program every aspect of the power check operation, such as data logging rate, display formats, and alarm conditions. You can display current, voltage, wattage, and amp hours in real time. It has an integrated charting software that automatically collects and displays data. All the data can be downloaded and stored for later analysis. If this sounds like something you would really like, make sure you head on over to everythinghamradio.com/WMR and check it out. And if you do, and enter the code EHSummer at checkout, you will get $50 off of your purchase. Normally the power check runs $184.95. If you enter the coupon code EHSummer, you get a $50 discount, and that comes to $134.95. You can't beat it. The offer expires September 30th, 2017, so make sure you head on over and get yours before the coupon expires. Also, don't forget to pick up your free USB port monitor with your purchase. Again, that's everythinghamradio.com/WMR for more information. Hey y'all, we are back with Brian Lloyd, WB6RQN, and we touched on this a little bit the last segment, and I don't know if you caught it or not, but he was talking about his airplane and all the signatures that he got from his around the world flight. Now, Brian first became on my radar about 2 months ago or so when I saw a article in the ARRL newsfeed about a ham that was recreating Amelia Earhart's solo flight around the world. So I got in contact with Brian, and of course, I wasn't able to get him before he left to talk about him, but I figured, if I can't get him before, let's get him afterwards, and then we can talk about all the amazing stuff that he had. So, Brian, first off, what made you want to fly solo around the world and follow this track that Amelia Earhart went on?
Well, the flying solo part was actually pretty much just limitations of the airplane. The problem with Amelia Earhart's flight is that there are many really long legs, which means the airplane has to be able to fly really long distances. Most general aviation airplanes, even with extra fuel tanks, cannot be made to fly the kinds of distances that are required to follow her route. Her route was an attempt by her to basically one-up the other pilots. Wiley Post had already flown around the world in his Lockheed Vega Winnie Mae, but he'd done it in the northern latitudes, and so he'd only flown about 20,000 miles total. So what she wanted to do was she wanted to go fly the greatest distance possible around the world, which basically meant fly around the world at the equator. This puts you in places that even today are difficult to fly in. So across Saharan Africa, I had some really long legs there. I got to see an awful lot of the Sahara Desert, and there's not an awful lot to look at in the Sahara Desert, I can tell you firsthand. But anyway, flying across the Sahara Desert, she had flown into what is now Eritrea and then across Yemen. And I'm sorry, right now Eritrea and Yemen are kind of bad places for Americans. So I deviated from her path a little bit there and flew across the Red Sea into Saudi Arabia and across Saudi Arabia to Oman before continuing on to Karachi, Pakistan. But in any case, it just seemed to me that if I was going to go to the trouble of flying around the world, I should do it all the way. This is kind of like, okay, I'm going to run a marathon, or an ultra marathon, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. That's kind of what this is. And solo also makes it even more of a challenge. For instance, I am only the 121st person to fly a relatively small airplane, and relatively small goes all the way up to multi-engine aircraft, biz jets and the like, around the world solo. I'm in all of aviation history. That means from the Wright brothers forward. Only 121 people have done it, and I am the 121st.
Wow.
So Contrast that, for instance, I didn't realize this. Do you know how many people have climbed Mount Everest?
No
It's
clue.
over 4,000.
Wow.
So it puts me in kind of an exclusive club. So that's part of it. If you're going to do something, do it all the way.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home, exactly. And so I went home, I went big, and I got home, all in one.
There you go. So speaking of going big, how many miles did you actually fly?
Give you some dead air there. Okay. Total mileage was 29,948 nautical miles. Now, you understand that in aviation we use nautical miles, which a nautical mile is longer than a statute mile. Statute mile number was 34,400, I think it was. I'd have to go get my calculator out and do the conversion. But basically, I flew much more than the actual circumference of the Earth at the equator.
Wow. And all that solo. What did you do?
All solo.
Yeah, what did you do with all this extra time on your hands?
Well, guess what? I talked to amateur radio operators. It's a requirement to have HF in the aircraft for flying over the water. And believe it or not, it is still, today, the primary means of communication, even with satellite phone and satellite data links. It is only just now that the airlines and air traffic control are switching from HF radio to satellite data link for communicating with the airliners going across the ocean. So yes, I was talking with, I'm there talking to AirInc along with the airliners. In several situations where airliners weren't able to get through, I relayed communications for airliners to AirInc and air traffic control because I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And remember, that's how the Amateur Radio Relay League began. It was all about being able to forward messages from one place to another because our radios just didn't have the range. In any case, so yes, I had HF in the airplane, and in fact, in preparing this airplane, which is a Mooney M20K 231, made in 1979, in preparing this airplane for the trip, I did make a permanent HF radio installation in the aircraft. I actually chose a commercial radio, a MICOM 3, which is a commercial HF transceiver designed for heavy-duty use. Also has built-in ALE, automatic link establishment. And it's properly wired into the aircraft's audio system, so it just appears as a number 3 communications radio in my radio stack in the aircraft. The control head is mounted in the instrument panel along with the other avionics, and the actual transceiver itself is back in the avionics bay, back in the back of the airplane. So that is my HF station in the air. I don't have a big VFO knob. I can key in a frequency, and it does have I can select a mode that allows me to rapidly tune up or down through the bands. But mostly I operate in channelized mode when I'm flying. And I had a number of standard frequencies set up for HF communications for amateur radio, and including some duplex channels for in case the pileups got too big. But I never got around to actually using that. But we had them set up. So during the periods of time where I had lots of time, and I wasn't using the HF to communicate with air traffic control, I went ahead and made contacts on the bands, primarily on 20 meters, 17 meters, and 15 meters. I have in the aircraft general coverage from 2.1 megahertz all the way up to 30 megahertz in order to cover both the ham bands and the aviation frequencies. But found most of the action for me was on 2017 and 15.
So over this 29,000 plus nautical miles that you were going, I'm sure you probably had high altitude most of the time, or a lot of the time. How many contacts did you make while you were airborne?
You know, I don't know. It was several hundred. It was probably 300 contacts. Remember, 100 contacts for me is a lot. And I had a couple of days where I pretty much ran a pileup. I ran a pileup as I was headed down off the coast of Venezuela on my way from Trinidad to Suriname. And that was a big day. I was surprised the band was open to Europe, and I made lots and lots of European contacts. I've almost never worked Europe because I've never had a QTH where the path to Europe was ever very good. So that was kind of fun for me to work all the European stations. And then again, I did a lot while I was down in Australia because again, I wasn't really using the radio to communicate with air traffic control. As long as air traffic control was leaving me alone and didn't need me to be on the HF, I was able to use the HF to make contacts. And I did. And it was great. So
let me get this straight. You can tell me how many revolutions your propeller made, which was
33,015,000 revolutions of the prop, and about 2,250 gallons of avgas, 48 quarts of oil, but that includes the oil changes. So, yeah, my friends joke that I keep track of entirely too many numbers.
So you can tell me all that, but you can't tell me for sure how many contacts you made?
Well, I hate to tell you this. I had this notepad that had everything from the trip on it, everything I was doing. Anytime I was given an instrument clearance or I made a contact, it went on this notepad. It was just a yellow steno pad that I tucked up in the corner of the airplane between the glare shield and the windscreen. And unfortunately, I left it in Bonnie Crystal's car when she met me in Oakland, and it has the log, and I have to get it back from her so that I can enter all of the entries into EQSL so people get QSL cards. So, and I know I have had people say, am I going to get a QSL card? Yeah, you're going to get a QSL card. I promise. I promise. So yes. So do I know exactly how many? No, I don't. I know there's like 5 pages of contacts in there because it was just a matter of, like I said, I'm not a contester. I cannot make, 10 contacts a minute. I just, it boggles my mind, these guys that can just boom, 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 exchange the call sign, exchange the signal report, boom, they're off to the next one. I just can't do that. I'm too much of a rag chewer.
Yeah, I don't see the draw to it. When I get on the radio, I want to talk.
I understand that.
I don't want to
just say. It's a skill. It's a skill. If you're into contesting, I mean, that is a skill. And my hat is off to those people who can do that. Mm-hmm. That is an amazing skill. They had to develop that. They had to work for it. And therefore, anybody who has developed a skill like that deserves recognition for, wow, that's cool.
Absolutely.
So I'm not one of those hams that goes, oh, contesting is stupid, or digital modes are stupid, or you're stupid if you can't do CW, or I'm not that kind of guy. Okay. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, radio is magic, and it doesn't matter how you do it. Enjoy it, have fun with it. Amateur radio is a great thing. It should be all inclusive, and we shouldn't try to say that there's only one way. We should revel in the fact that there are people that can run a pile up and make 10 contacts a minute or 5 contacts a minute or whatever they're capable of doing. That's a skill. That's cool. It's amazing to watch someone do that. It's also cool to sit and rag chew about SDR, software defined radio, or something like that, or to do emergency communications, or, whatever the skill is, it's great to see people who have it and who have developed it, and they should be applauded.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm not saying anything bad about contests. Just don't get me wrong on that. I
didn't think you were.
I'm like you. I like to talk. I like to, at least say, how's the weather over at your edge of the world? I don't know. I can't do that. I can't do the 2 contacts a minute. This is my call sign, your call sign. Here's your signal report. Here's my signal report. Okay, QRZ, next person. I can't do that. I gotta say hi.
Exactly. And I know I try to speed it up, especially when I can hear that there's 7 or 8 people calling me or more, and they all want to make that contact, and so I don't want to spend too much time. But you're right. It's like, wow, I'm talking to someone in Greece. I'm talking to someone in Denmark. I'm talking to someone in the U.S. I'm talking to someone in Indonesia. It's kind of cool, and you kind of want to say, hey, wow, what's it like where you are?
Exactly.
But you have to consider the fact that the bands may change, and all those people want that contact, and you want to help them get that contact if you can. So there's a balancing point. But it is interesting. I did notice in looking down the logbook that I rarely made more than 2 contacts in a minute. Because I'm looking at the clock and recording the time and the call sign, and I would say I averaged 1 to 2 contacts a minute was about the best I could do, because I like to talk to people.
Mm-hmm. So, with all this time on your hands, and you're making these contacts and stuff, how long did it actually take you to fly around the world?
Oh, well, according to the
first off, let me get a broad picture here. How long was it from the day that you left until the day you got back?
Okay, it was 66 days. I took off on May 31st, and I was back last Friday, which is what, the 4th, was it? I think that's when you got back. Yeah, and I got back on the 4th. I know because I know it's 66 days because one of my friends came up with his grandson, and so he said, well, how long did it take you? And I said, well, let's figure it out. And so I had him add up the days, of the days of the month in June, and the days of the month in July, and we had 4 days in August and 1 day and that's how we figured out it was 66 days. So it was kind of fun to do that. I think he was about 6 or 7 years old. So.
So out of those 66 days, I'm sure you probably took time off, and I'm sure there was some incidents and stuff that we're going to talk about in the next segment. But do you know how many flying hours you did during that time?
Oh, absolutely. That part I know down to the 10th of an hour because my logbook keeps that for me. Actually, the actual time, flying time, was 220.1 hours. 220.1 hours.
Wow, that's a lot of hours.
My longest flight was 17.5 hours.
And that was from like Australia area to.
Actually,
to
that was
Hawaii?
that was from American Samoa, Pago to Honolulu, with an overflight of Howland Island, which is where Amelia Earhart disappeared. So yeah, that was my longest day, but there were some seriously long days all the way along there. But anyway, let's get into that in the next segment.
All right, y'all, we'll be right back, and we'll continue our talk with Brian about his trip around the world. So stick around, we'll be right back. Hey, y'all, so real quick before we get back into our interview with Brian, just wanted to make sure and mention that please head over to my swag store. I got some stuff on there with the Ham Radio, Everything Ham Radio podcast logo on it. I got some coasters, I got mouse pads, I got some coffee mugs, and several other things. I also have some call sign wood working things that I'm working on. I got a desk plate that I'm going to be working on. Fixing to make one up. I'll have that up on the swag store pretty soon. You follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, you've seen my first attempt at a sign with my name and call sign on it, as well as the a ham radio tower on the side there. I'm also working on a new project that I am almost finished up with that I'll be putting up, or that I'll post pictures on. It won't be on the Swag Store just yet. But as soon as I get it mailed off to the person that is making it, I'll have pictures of it posted online so you can see it. And several other things. So make sure you check out the Swag Store. You can find that at everythinghamradio.com/store. And check that out. Buy it if you want to. So yeah, make sure you please check that out. And let me know if you want something, and I will make sure that you get it. So let's get back to our interview with Brian and hear more about his trip around the world. All right, y'all. We are back with Brian Lloyd. Again, his call sign is WB6RQN. What was that phonetic again? I forgot all about it.
Whiskey before 6 is really quite nice.
There you go. That's a good thing. All right, so we are talking about his recreation of Amelia Earhart's solo flight around the world, and it was the 80th anniversary of it when you left?
Yes, it was. I tried to adhere as much as possible to her dates and her schedule, and I didn't do too badly. She formally announced her flight as she departed from Miami on June 1st, 1937. So I departed from Fort Lauderdale because the airport where she departed from in 1937 no longer exists. So I departed from Fort Lauderdale on June 1st, 2017, and really, for the most part, within a few days, kept up with her schedule. And all I can say is, wow, that was one seriously hard schedule. My respect for this woman has risen 1,000-fold after having literally flown, 25,000 miles in her shoes. She was, if you think about it, her flight was solo for her because she was the only pilot. She had to fly the airplane every minute that the airplane was flying. Yes, she had a rudimentary autopilot. But yeah, she was sole pilot flying. Fred Noonan was her navigator, and he was the consummate navigator. Fred Noonan doesn't get a lot of press. He's just, that guy who was with Amelia Earhart. And if it wasn't for the fact that he was with Amelia Earhart, who was such a rock star, he, in his own right, would have been a rock star. Most people don't realize that nearly all of the routes for the Pan Am Clippers that flew around the Pacific in the late 30s had been laid out by Fred Noonan. So long-distance air travel in the around the world was created in part through the efforts of Fred Noonan. So like I said, if it weren't for the fact that Amelia Earhart was such a rock star, he would have been. Kind of like, it doesn't matter who you are or how good you are. If you open for the Rolling Stones, you're just that band that opened for the Rolling Stones. You know what I mean?
Yep. Right after you left, I think, you know how Google will go, like, when you look at one thing and it kind of pops up something else or whatever that
sure.
In reference that you look at. Well, I remember looking at your website, and I happened to look it up through Google, and, of course, it had the Amelia Earhart in the tag or whatever, and I remember seeing another story about how, it was like a news story or something like that, I think, about how they found a picture, and if memory serves me correct, it was from the place where she reportedly went missing, from that island or whatever, and they found a picture of a dock with her airplane, or what is believed to be her airplane in the background, and her like squatting down along the pier, or along a pier or something like that. And it's very faint, very hard to see, but they're believing now that, or this group or news story or whatever, is believing now that they found this picture that proves that Amelia Earhart actually was able to land at that island.
Well, first off, I am not an Amelia Earhart expert, other than the fact that I have attempted to, and successfully, completed her flight. That does not make me an expert on what happened to her. There's a good chance we will never know what happened to her. But basically, I think there are three really good stories, or really good ways of looking at it. First off, the most obvious one is she ended up just going down in the Pacific Ocean. She and Fred, the airplane ran out of fuel. They ditched in the ocean and lost their lives. They were never found. And if you think about it, that is, from a pure statistical point of view, the most likely scenario. Pacific Ocean big, islands very tiny. If you go to my website, you can see the picture of Howland Island. In fact, someone once made the comment, or along the trip, made the comment when I posted that picture. They said, "I thought that was just a bird splat on your windshield." Okay, it really is small. They were shooting for a pin in a haystack. So anyway, so that's probably the most likely. The second story that I like better is the fact that for some days after she disappeared, amateur radio operators, the Coast Guard, other commercial operators heard transmissions and several people identified the transmissions as her voice. They did some HF direction finding, with directional antennas, and the bearings cross in the vicinity of an island called Gardner Island, which was several hundred miles south of Howland Island, where she was supposed to go. And so I really like to think that, yes, she did actually find Gardner Island and landed on the island. And for several days, using whatever fuels left in her airplane, she'd start the engine, she'd power her radios, and she attempted to communicate. Unfortunately, she wasn't picked up. Now, the third one, which is this photograph, is kind of the one that the conspiracy theorists really like, which is, yes, she was taken by the Japanese, and the Japanese government and the U.S. government have covered it up.
Conspiracy theory.
Exactly, conspiracy theory. The only thing I can say about that is, what advantage would that have been to either the Japanese government or the U.S. government to cover that up? Other than the fact that if the Japanese did take her and she did die in captivity with the Japanese, yeah, it'd be kind of bad press. But all that went away at the end of the war. So I just have trouble with the conspiracy theory kind of thing. But I'll tell you one thing that is for sure, and that is the disappearance of Amelia Earhart is one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. And we may never know, but it's still really interesting to think about and to conjecture about. And in my case, I've flown around the world following her route, and I know how difficult that flight was because I've done it now. And the answer is, she was an amazing woman. She deserves all the credit we can give her, and it's really a sad thing that she and Fred Noonan disappeared.
Absolutely. So let's get back on on your trip a little bit here.
Okay.
What was the most memorable part of your trip?
Oh gosh, the most memorable part of my trip? It's all memorable. I can't tell you how many wonderful, fantastic things happened to me and how many bad things happened to me. So, it's from the point of view of highs and lows, it was up there. It was up there and down there. So, the most memorable, I really couldn't pick out one thing that was just most memorable. There were some really interesting things that happened to me, and everyone wants to go, were you scared? I really can't say that I was scared at any point along the way. Probably the scariest things that happened to me were weather related. And there were some times there where I was a little bit concerned, all having to do with weather. There's a weather phenomenon or characteristic of our planet called the intertropical convergence zone. And this is pretty much where the moisture in our atmosphere comes from. Basically, in the tropics, the heat of the sun causes water from the oceans to evaporate and form really, really big thunderstorms and huge bands of thunderstorms. And I had to cross the ITCZ twice, not to mention all the thunderstorms over Asia. So whether I got to experience pretty much what Amelia Earhart experienced in terms of weather, and unlike the United States where we have data-linked weather into the cockpit, I'm really on my own. It's whatever I can figure out from the weather, and that's what I'm going to get. Yes, I get weather reports, and they give me kind of a general overview, but I'm really jamming the weather over the Pacific and over the Atlantic Ocean and over Asia near the equator. At one point in time, going into Myanmar, going into Yangon, Myanmar, I was actually upset. I flew into a small thunderstorm that was just forming, and because it was just forming, it did not show up on my storm scope. Storm scope is a spherics receiver, and basically what it does is it tells me the direction and distance to lightning discharges, which keeps me out of thunderstorms. Unless you blunder into a thunderstorm just before the lightning starts, just as it's turning into a mature thunderstorm. And that's what happened to me. And it actually rolled the airplane up over 90 degrees. I was actually partially inverted when it happened. Fortunately for me, I teach how to recover from upsets. That's one of the things that I enjoy teaching in my aerobatic airplane. And so guess what? I got to apply what it is that I teach. And it worked. Amazing.
Imagine that.
Well, it's good to know. You teach something and you've never actually had it happen to you. It's actually kind of good to know that it works. So it does. Upset recovery works. Unload, roll, and recover. Anyway, so that was one thing. Another thing that I got into was over the Tasman Sea between Australia and New Zealand. I actually ended up flying into the tail end of a weather system that was over the west coast of New Zealand, and I flew into thunder snow, which is rather interesting. We think of thunder as being a function of lightning, which is a function of a thunderstorm, which is heavy rain and severe turbulence. In thunder snow, you can actually get lightning created by falling snow. Transfer of charges on the ice crystals. And the interesting thing about that is when it lets go, the lightning is just huge. It's not like there's a lightning bolt. It's like there's a lightning everything. And my spherics receiver, my storm scope, it just lit up completely because the discharge is all around you. So that was another interesting thing that I experienced. I started to pick up ice during that and had to descend to a low enough altitude where the ice would melt off the airplane. So that was another kind of a sketchy moment. And then leaving New Zealand, the reason I'm getting all of this in New Zealand and Australia is, guess what? It's winter down there. So, I've gone from 100-degree days up in Texas and, 90 degrees and 90% humidity as I traveled around the equator. And now all of a sudden I'm down in snow and weather and everything in winter in the southern hemisphere. So I've kind of gotten to experience everything. Now, probably the diciest moment was I actually had an engine failure. As I was departing from New Zealand and heading for American Samoa, Pongo Pongo, my engine actually quit. It started out running badly, and I realized that this was a bad thing. I actually got the airplane turned around and headed back, and as I was headed back for New Zealand, the engine quit completely. Fortunately, there was an island with an airport on the northeastern edge of New Zealand called Great Barrier Island, and I was in a good position to be able to spiral down and land at the airport there. But fortunately, I was able to get the engine started again, and it seemed to be running well enough that I opted to try to make my way back to where I had started, which was Hamilton, New Zealand, for a very simple reason, and that was I knew that at Hamilton there was a facility there that could repair any problem in my engine that could have occurred. I actually thought that the engine-driven fuel pump had failed. Turns out later that it was a combination of things that created a vapor lock. And I was fortunate enough to have an engine monitor that collects all kinds of data on my aircraft. It records, fuel pressure, oil temperature, cylinder head temperature, exhaust gas temperature, fuel flow, all kinds of things. And from that, I was able to use a service called Savvy Analysis, and they actually looked at the engine data, and based on what I told them and some feedback they gave to me, we kind of figured out what happened to the airplane to cause the engine to quit. And it was a vapor lock, and it was a combination of things, being at the right altitude, the right temperature. At some point along the way, I had gotten some contaminated fuel, which had partly obstructed the fuel filter. All of these things came together to create a perfect storm, as it were, to create vapor lock and the engine quit. So, yeah, there was that, and that did get my attention. And unfortunately, fortunately, I got back, no problem, landed. But it was another week while we pretty much disassembled the entire fuel system and went through and made sure that there was absolutely no contamination left anywhere, that all the components of the fuel system came out and went on the test bench and were tested completely. And then after that, I took a day and flew the airplane as high as I possibly could to try to recreate the conditions that caused the problem, and determined that there was absolutely no sign of any problem. And at that point, I was ready to go ahead and cross the Pacific and head for home. So that was my exciting time.
Wow. So how many actual different countries, I guess maybe I'm looking for, did you go through? Well,
in terms of actual countries, I landed in 19 different countries. I crossed a few more. And some of the places I landed were technically, even though we might think of them as other countries, they're not. For instance, I landed in St. Thomas, which is actually part of the United States. I landed in American Samoa, which is actually part of the United States. I landed in Hawaii, and that is part of the United States. But they're very much like other countries. They're very different. So if you look at it that way, that would have been 22 different places. And I did overfly a number of countries. For instance, going from Dakar in Senegal to N'Djamena in Chad, which was a almost 2,000 nautical mile leg, which would be 2,000. That'd be 2,300 miles. I overflew a number of countries in Africa. For the most part of that, I was over the country of Mali. I overflew Niger and Nigeria. Mali is an interesting place. There's a warning out for U.S. aircraft that they must stay above 26,000 feet over Mali because someone in Mali shot down an airliner not that long ago. So yeah, there was a little concern that here I am flying over places where they shoot down airliners. Fortunately, my little airplane does not have very much of an infrared signature, and I think those shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft missiles probably going to have a tough time seeing me even up there at 23,000 feet.
Wow. So, did you have any problems getting permission to fly across these different countries or landing in the different countries?
Well, that is an issue. You have to get formal permission from every country you're flying over and every country you're landing in. We take it for granted here in the United States that we can just get in our airplanes or get in our cars and go wherever we want to. And that's really not the case for much of the world. So and I was really actually in the beginning kind of worried that I was going to have to go to Washington, D.C. and make the rounds of all of the embassies of all the countries I was going to fly over and land. But I communicated with some of the other folks who have flown around the world. Specifically, I communicated with a gentleman by the name of Claude Meunier, who heads an organization called Earth Rounders. And it's sort of the club of people who have flown around the world or are planning to fly around the world. And he connected me up with a gentleman by the name of Mike Gray, who runs a business called White Rose Aviation in the UK. And Mike Gray took over getting me all of my permits and permissions and connecting me up with handling agents and making sure that I knew where there was fuel and where there wasn't fuel for all of Africa and Asia. And so Mike turned out to be just a godsend and a wonderfully nice guy. And without him, I'm not sure I could have done this. I mean, there are just so many people I can point to along this trip that I could not have made this trip without them. Bonnie Crystal is another one. She actually is very much a mover and shaker in the amateur ALE network in the world, and is very much working to get hams using ALE, automatic link establishment, it's kind of a digital mode. Basically, the radios communicate digitally, but once they establish the connection, then it switches over to just plain old single sideband. So it's really great, especially for me in the airplane. With ALE on the airplane, I just turn the rig on, put it into ALE mode, and fly. And anybody with ALE could call me, and it's almost like a telephone call because my radio then rings, literally, in my headset, and their call sign flashes on the display of the radio, and I reach over and I punch my audio panel onto COM 3, which is the HF, and hit the push to talk on the yoke, and I'm talking to them. So and the nice thing about it is because it automatically does sounding on all the different bands, it figures out for me which is the best band, where is their propagation. It does that for me automatically. So it's pretty slick. Hey, folks, if you haven't tried ALE, you can pick up a copy of PC ALE and put it on your PC. If you're already running digital modes, you already have the interface and everything, you can play with ALE also. So there's my pitch for ALE.
Yeah, I've been trying to get a hold of her to come on to the show and do an interview with her about ALE, but I had talked to her, I guess, right about the time you were leaving, and unfortunately she wasn't able to at the time. So I'm hoping that sometime here in the near future I'll have her on here, or perhaps somebody else that knows something about ALE will come on and talk to us about it. So that is coming up in the future, y'all. So if you want to learn more about that, stay tuned.
I'm not an expert on ALE, but I got to admit it's pretty slick. It definitely makes HF operating much more of a sure thing rather than a hit or miss. Bonnie did more than just get me ALE though. Gosh, I don't have her call sign here. I know I can see in my mind her signature on the side of the airplane. But it's KX6 KQ6XA. That's it. KQ6XA. Bonnie did a lot more. Bonnie just kind of stepped up and took over the ground side of my operation for me. She set up my website. She co-authors on the website. She's written press releases. She's just an amazing woman, and she gets a huge amount of credit. She's another one of those people. It's just kind of behind the scenes here, and yes, I get credit for the solo flight around the world, but she's another one of those people that if she hadn't been there and doing it, I couldn't have done this. So she gets kudos. She definitely does. Amazing woman. Bonnie, I love you.
Come on to my show, please.
Yes, Bonnie, you need to be on Curtis' show.
So let's talk a little bit about the ham side of all of the different countries that you went through. Were you able to use your call sign in each one of them? Did you have to apply for a one of their license? How does that work?
Well, over most of the United States, I was able to, or I'm sorry, most of the world, I was able to use my United States call sign. Especially as long as I'm out over the water, I am definitely WB6RQN slant aeronautical mobile. But a lot of countries also allowed me to do that as well. Australia and New Zealand allowed me to operate using just my call sign. I'm pretty sure that I was legal everywhere I did it. And the rules vary, and anyone who's contemplating doing something like this really needs to make sure that they're fully aware of all the rules and that they don't violate the rules and regulations of any particular country they're operating in. I was very careful to try to operate only in those countries where I was the reciprocal licensing was automatic, or I was out over the water where I could legitimately operate as WB6RQN AM out beyond the territorial boundaries of the various countries I was passing. The places where I was not sure, I just didn't operate. So that was that. But definitely out over the oceans, no problem. And certainly Australia and New Zealand, no problem. Probably my best reception from a ham radio point of view happened in Indonesia. The hams in Indonesia were just fantastic. I arrived and there probably had to be 20 hams there. The hams and the local flying club, with a lot of overlap between them, as a matter of fact. A lot of hams were also pilots in the local flying club. They were just fantastic. They hauled me off, and they had a big press conference with radio and TV and the newspapers, and they had a big mural, and it was a lot of fun. I have many Indonesian ham radio club shirts now and hats, and with my call sign and the club logo, and if not, they did dress me well. So yes, that was probably my biggest and best amateur radio encounter along the way. Most everybody else, my encounters were on the air. So, but this was probably the best eyeball QSO I've ever had.
So when you landed in a airport somewhere and you were staying there overnight, did you was there a hotel nearby?
Well,
I say that because here in the U.S. it's like, okay, here's an airport. There's chances are there's going to be a hotel nearby, but I don't know about the rest of the world. I mean, where did you stay when you were on your overnight things?
Well, we started out. I worked with a travel agent to essentially, make sure I had hotels every place I went. And that turned out to not work because little problems would cause me. I would arrive a day late or a day early, and my reservation was wrong. Fortunately, the hotels all honored my reservations, so that wasn't a problem. But it turned out that just making reservations just didn't work all that well. So, but yeah, hotels were generally available. I was landing for the most part in relatively big major airports. In major cities in the world, so hotels were not difficult to come by in those places. It's not like I was landing at some little tiny airport in the middle of nowhere. Most of the places I went into were very large international airports, for the simple reason that every place I went, I had to clear customs immigration, and customs immigration services typically are available at the big airports, especially when I'm flying really, really long legs and I'm not going to get in until 10, 11, or 12 o'clock at night. It's the big international airports that have 24-hour customs services that really allowed me to do that. So,
well, that's good. I mean, at least that's a fairly easy way to do it, easy way to look at things. I guess the last thing I have, you mentioned a little bit about it, but what kind of ham radio setup did you have? I mean, you said you had the radio and it was built in your thing. I mean, what kind of antenna do you have? Do you have just a wire hanging out the back of your plane, or how did that work?
Well, the antenna was actually a very interesting problem, and once again, I really have to give Bonnie credit for this, because she went to the trouble of modeling my antenna and determining what would and would not work. The station I already mentioned, it's a MICOM 3 commercial ALE transceiver with an AL. It's actually a MICOM 3T, which is intended to be trunk mounted. So it's got the HF transceiver, the receiver transmitter unit, is separate from the control head. And the control head is permanently mounted with the avionics in the instrument panel, and then the RTU is back in the back. The antenna tuner is an SG237, because that has kind of the widest matching range of any of the antenna tuners I could find. The antenna itself is a 13-foot wire that runs along the belly of the airplane, and at most, it's 11 inches from the belly of the airplane. Well, the nice thing about that is it's there all the time, which means my HF is available always. It's not like a trailing wire or a wire that goes up from the top of the airplane to the vertical stabilizer and out to the wingtip where someone might walk into it. No, this wire is permanently affixed to the belly of the airplane, and it doesn't get in anybody's way, and therefore I can leave it all the time. So but Bonnie did use NEC to model the antenna, and it's an extremely difficult load to match. At the highest frequencies, the feed point impedance rises to a whopping, I think, 7 ohms. And at the lowest frequencies, like down at 2.1 megahertz, which is kind of the bottom of my spectrum of channels that I need to be able to use, the feed point impedance was something like 0.05 ohms. So the radiation efficiency of this antenna at lower frequencies is really bad. But if conditions are good, I may put 100 watts in, and I may have an effective radiated power of 100 milliwatts or something. But if conditions are good, I'll be heard.
And you're at 25,000 plus feet or so. So
but the radiation pattern is pretty much a classical, donut like. It works pretty well. I was amazed at how well it did work. I tended to operate, especially in the hand bands, up on 20 meters. The actual resonant frequency of the wire was up very near 17 meters. And so in the upper frequencies, it worked pretty well. But remember, when I'm dealing with AirRink and air traffic control, they're giving me frequencies down at 3.2, 3.3 megahertz, 5.1 megahertz, 8.8 megahertz, so I recall, 13.3 megahertz. So these are all en route aviation HF frequencies. So I ended up using the entire range of the installation, and it worked well on all of them. Or let me put it this way, it worked adequately on all of them. It worked.
Yeah, that's I guess all that matters.
Yep.
And you got some contacts with it, so there you go.
I did. I made quite a few contacts. Like I said, I made probably 200-300 contacts. Unfortunately, Bonnie's, like I said, I left that notepad in Bonnie's car. I got to get it back so I can go ahead and log all of those contacts. Those of you who made contacts with me, you will definitely get QSL cards through eQSL. I use eQSL. I'm not doing actual physical QSL cards. So.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your experience with us. That if we can't make contact with you or be in the airplane with you, I guess maybe this is the next best thing. So thank you very much for coming on. Sorry about the miscommunications there and not being able to connect on time, but thank you for staying late with me.
No worries. No worries. By the way, I'm still going to be making contacts. I've got the HF in the airplane, and I know there's still a lot of people who want the opportunity to communicate with me and get a QSL card for the Amelia Earhart flight. I am planning to fly up to view the eclipse, and it's my hope to be able to make contacts while I'm doing that. So just because you haven't talked to me yet doesn't mean you're not going to have an opportunity to talk to me. I'm going to be making an effort to help everybody who wanted a contact with me get one. So I will be continuing to operate HF in the airplane.
There you go. I might have to try and hit you up when you're flying overhead.
Absolutely.
Yeah, where are you going to be going to?
Actually, I'm going to go back to Atchison, Kansas, which is Amelia Earhart's birthplace. I went there on the way on my trip around the world. I thought that was a fitting point to be the next to last stop for my trip before I ended it. And it just happens to be on the path of totality for the upcoming eclipse. So maybe I'll be able to participate in the eclipse QSO party at least part of the way while I'm flying the airplane. But I do know that I'm not going to be operating HF when I'm on the ground and watching the eclipse.
There you go.
So, but to and from.
You'll probably be flying right over me because I live just south of Fort Worth, so you'll be flying pretty well right over me.
Absolutely. I'll be going right over the top.
All right, Brian. Well, you have a wonderful evening, and thanks again for coming on. This should air tomorrow.
Fantastic.
Here in about 4 or 5 hours. So.
Okay, Curtis, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on your show, and I'm looking forward to listening to it.
All right, Brian. Have a great evening, and we will talk to you next time.
All right.
Thanks. All right, 73, sir.
73.
All right, y'all. So that pretty much wraps it up. What y'all think about that? If y'all thought anything like I did, you thought that was an awesome conversation. Thank you very much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/everythingham radio. I have the page still up at facebook.com/everythinghamradio. radio. I am on YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio and on Twitter at K5CLM. You can find the show notes for today's episode at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/81. That's the number 81. Thank you very much for listening. Please share this with your friends. And if you like what you heard here and you would like to help out further, there's a couple ways you can do it, especially if you want to do it financially. You can make a one-time donation through PayPal. You can find a link at the bottom of each show notes. You can become a per-episode contributor through Patreon. And thank you very much for those that have done that. And for the easiest way, I guess, would be to shop on Amazon.com through my affiliate link. And for all of you, all of those that have done that, especially here lately, thank you very much for that. That pretty much wraps it up. Oh, you can find all the information on how to do that at everythinghamradio.com/support. If you haven't signed up for my email list, you can go to everythinghamradio.com/subscribe. Or you can go to the show notes, and at the bottom of the page, there's a little form you fill out with your name and call sign and email address. You click on the button, sign me up, and you'll get an email from me with a link that you'll need to click on in order to start receiving emails from me. So make sure you click on that link or you won't get emails. For all of the new subscribers I've gotten here the last week or two, thank you for signing up. And I guess that pretty much wraps it up. I want to thank again Brian for coming on today and sharing with us his adventure of his trip around the world. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up. So thank y'all for listening. Please share this with your friends. And especially don't forget about the special event station this coming Saturday on August the 12th. And again, that is from 10 until 3. and it's going to be on Echolink and D-Star only. There's not going to be any HF, so anybody can do it. You can do it from your phone, as a matter of fact. So make sure you give your support for that and check in on that special event station. I guess with that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you all very much again for listening, and until next time, this is K5CLM signing out. 73, y'all.